Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Refold Podcast. My name is Clayton, also known as George Pig, and I am the community manager here at Refold. Today, we're joined by Killer Gerbah, aka the ASB Player dev. If you're not familiar with ASB Player, it's a free and open source Chromium plugin that turns pretty much any web page that has an embedded video player into an immersion learning meta layer. Okay, and I'm here with Killer Gerbah, the ASB Player dev. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
So you just got back, I guess, from traveling.
That's right. Yeah, I got back, I think, last week from Japan, where I was there for
How was the trip?
It was really good. I spent some time in Sapporo, and then a few weeks in Tokyo. Saw some family, saw a lot of friends, did a little bit of touristy stuff, and yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. So, for the people who listen, for the listeners who don't know who you are, do you want to introduce yourself, talk about your history with Japanese, and then also your project, the famous ASB Player?
Sure. So I'm Killer Gerbah on Discord. I'm a software engineer in real life, working on games. And I've been studying Japanese, well, from the start was probably over a decade ago, when I took some classes in high school. And I actually studied in that way until I graduated from college. But I've been doing more input-heavy methods since maybe like 3 years ago, very similar to Refold. And I think I've seen a lot of my progress because of that, so in the last few years. And during that time when I was studying Japanese, I eventually got around to developing tools for myself. And that's kind of how ASB Player came about. It just kind of grew organically out of my need to do sentence mining, and it just kind of grew and grew and grew organically until it became something that is relatively usable and I think somewhat popular, at least within the Refold community. So I had never intended it for it to become that way, but it just kind of did. And I'm happy that now people are able to benefit from it.
Yeah. So from a Refold perspective, it's popular in the community. For coaching clients, we get them started with immersion learning with something like Iago or Language Reactor, usually for the first couple of weeks because they're plug and play. You download the extension, it's easy. And then usually after we actually get them in the habits of immersing, and they're ready to start sentence mining, we move them over to ASB Player. Because ASB Player, love it to bits, does require some tech savvy. It's not in the App Store. And actually getting it set up can be a little bit difficult for people who are not used to FOSS tools.
Right.
So with ASB Player, do you want to describe what the tool actually does? I think it does a great job, by the way. I actually have a client who is learning Ojibwe, which is a Native American language. Mm-hmm. And again, because ASB Player is language agnostic, you can use it to make cards out of anything.
Right. Yeah, so, about what it does, and I guess for people who haven't used it or watching this, ASB Player, primarily, I think the way people use it is to sentence mine or make language flashcards out of streaming video on the internet. And it's one of a few applications or extensions that actually do this, like you mentioned, Language Reactor, and I guess a different tool. Okay. I haven't used that before, but I have heard of Language Reactor, and I can understand why people would be more interested in using that one because it is more plug and play. And so, I mean, the reason ASB Player is the way it is because I kind of have, I guess, for lack of a better word, like a philosophy in mind about how it should be. Namely, like it should just do one thing that really well, and leave like other problems to other pieces of software that solve those problems really well. So, for example, Yomi-chan exists, right, for Japanese, and that's like the de facto pop-up dictionary that people use in the browser. And similarly, like Anki is the piece of software that people use for flashcards. So naturally, ASB Player integrates with Anki, and it lets people choose the dictionary that they actually want to use. So that's like a little bit about why ASB Player is a bit difficult to use. And I do have intentions to eventually get it onto the extension store. I actually tried to do this years ago, but it got rejected because I think it wasn't unique enough at the time, and there were other extensions that did similar things like Anime Book. So I think now it's in a state where I could actually do that, and with a little bit more work. So that's some explanation about why ASB Player is the way it is, and a little bit about what it does.
So, it takes a little bit of elbow grease to get ASB Player like set up.
Mm-hmm.
But once you've got it set up, it works everywhere. And the cool thing, I've not seen this, like this language reactor, you have to deal with the subs on the site that you're in.
Right.
With ASB Player, not only is it not limited to YouTube or Netflix, you can use it on pretty much any sort of like embedded video. The cool thing is that you can just drag and drop the SRT. So if you're on some random site and you happen to have matching subs, you can drag and drop the SRT, and boom, you've got some interactive immersion. You can make some audio-visual Anki cards on like any streaming site.
Right. Yeah, and I guess that's one of the features of ASB Player that really distinguishes itself from like other extensions that do similar things. And again, I think that just comes from my own like philosophy. Like, if I'm going to write some software, I want it to be like really reusable. And I don't want it to be like some, like a Migaku or like a language reactor that already kind of does a specific thing for Netflix. I think there were also some like insights that I was able to gain into like how to actually make it possible. Although I think anybody like with like a reasonable grasp of like how rendering in the browser works could reach similar insights. But I think once I realized how I could make ASB Player work on any basically any website, like I thought to myself, like, why not do that? So I think maybe that's probably why people are using that, like even considering ASB Player against other options that exist.
And some features of ASB Player are not always readily apparent to like your casual user. For example, a lot of people don't know that ASB Player, you don't actually have to supply the SRT. If you are using something like Netflix, there's actually an option to use like the built-in subs, which is not apparent to some end users.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, yeah, I definitely would love to see ASB Player become friendlier to like normies. You know what I mean?
Yeah, me too. I think I see a lot of questions like coming up about how do you use ASB Player with Netflix? Like, how do you get the subs? And I often find myself like repeating myself, like, oh, you just use this shortcut, or like, open this dialog. And I do think there's a lot of room for improvement in terms of like, I guess, direction like within the software about like, here are the things that you could do. I am like a tech guy, so like for me, like the bare minimum is to write a README and then like just hope that people read it, since that's what I would expect myself to do if I'm trying to figure something out. But yeah, I've realized that people don't do that, and they probably don't want to go to a GitHub page and like just read through walls of text. So that is definitely something I agree that could use a lot of improvement. Maybe some kind of like first-time user experience that I could build into the software.
I've seen a couple of the other Refold team members take a crack at it. I know that Vanessa wrote, I think she calls it simple sentence mining or something. I think it's actually linked on your GitHub. And then I think Ben made 2 videos about it.
Right.
And I don't know, I did get a comment from some people that Ben's videos were maybe a little bit, again, not simple enough for some people. So I think so, the community has tried to sort of like fill that gap and help people get into ASB Player. But I'll be honest, I worked with Vanessa, and we had a client who was a web dev, and it actually took about an hour of us both in there getting everything set up properly. So once it's set up, it's fine. But there's definitely this gap of like, how do we get people onto ASB Player? And I do have to say, major props. I've seen ASB Player grow. So you have the Discord server for the tool, and you listen to our feedback. Very early on, I kind of rejected ASB Player because I was like, there's no auto pause feature. And then after we mentioned it, boom, you add the auto pause feature.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I guess, I mean, it definitely hasn't been all me, like working on just writing code. There's definitely been, I guess specifically within Refold, I feel like Shiki, which I guess this might be Vanessa who you're referring to? Okay, yeah. And I think Tridor maybe as well. I hope I'm saying his name right. Have been like really vocal about ASB Player and like kind of getting people into it. So I'm really thankful for that. And also just general suggestions from the community that have generally usually are really good suggestions. And like I'm like, because of my personality, like I'm pretty like hardcore on like just figure it out, right? Like I try to make it somewhat intuitive to use, but obviously like haven't quite succeeded at that completely. So I definitely am like super open to suggestions, and I'm really happy. There's some people who have been, who I think have probably a lot of talent for like they could be a UI or UX designer like in their future, who have made like really great contributions to ASB Player just by suggesting ideas. And I've also received pretty significant contributions in code to ASB Player that have been like actually like really huge features. So for example, like the subtitle auto detection on like YouTube and Netflix and Amazon Prime and so on, that was actually written by somebody else. And I had not any intention at the time to add that feature, just because actually it is quite complicated. You have to maintain compatibility with all these various sites, which can differ in like how they fetch subtitles. So it gets to be pretty gnarly code because you, and sorry, I'm digressing, but you have to reverse engineer like how these websites are grabbing the subtitles. So the fact that somebody came and like just kind of figured that out for Netflix and YouTube for me is just like really incredible. And so I'm really thankful for all the people who have contributed to ASB Player. It's definitely not been like an effort like of just me. So
what is your philosophy behind ASB Player? And like, it takes a special type of person, I guess, to make a free and open source software like ASB Player.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to kind of explain the origins of the software, I had never, like I said before, I had never intended for like people to start using it to like any large extent. It was really just for me. Like, I originally just wanted to watch subtitles with audio, like in a list somewhere. And I guess at the time I hadn't found software that had like did a thing like that. So I ended up just doing that, like building a web app to do that, and that's all it did. And then at some point I realized, oh, I just want to watch, like I want to watch anime with subtitles on the side, right? So the subtitles aren't in my face, but if I want to look at them, then I can look at like a different tab, and then I can see the list. And then it turns out that this was actually possible, and then I was able to bang that out. And then it just kind of like spiraled into like, oh wow, I can actually sentence mine like from streaming video. Like just found out about some new capabilities that Chrome provides, and then using those to do all these things. So it kind of all just grew organically, and I didn't have like a kind of a unified philosophy or intention at the time. But I think now it's more, I think because of what it has coincidentally turned into, I think what has been consistent with like what I've been doing when with ASBPlayer is that, yeah, I mean, I do want it to be free and like for people to use, because I don't think it's a particularly hard software problem to solve. And if there wasn't a free option that already existed, then somebody was going to build it if it wasn't going to be me. Because none of these tools, because all I'm doing is just like kind of strapping together a bunch of different APIs and tools to kind of culminate into this thing that sentence mines. So it's not, in my opinion, not super hard. So it should be free. I actually do have a little bit of disagreement with like the philosophies, or I don't know if it's really philosophy, but like some of the kind of the methods that people employ to like make money from this type of software, because often, because the problem isn't extremely hard, like the way that you would make money off of a tool like this is by locking a user into like the ecosystem of tools. And then that kind of combines into like a user experience that maybe is worth paying money for. But at the same time, I would say it is a little bit consumer unfriendly, because of locking you into this kind of ecosystem of tools. So I guess for me, it's like, I just want ASBPlayer to do one problem, which isn't really that hard, really well. And I do want people to use it for free, both for their benefit, and I think it does benefit me, because like in some way, like precisely because I make very little money, working on this. I guess on the other hand, I do get like the intrinsic motivation that, oh wow, I'm actually contributing something of value, to the like to people and to the world. So yeah, I guess in a kind of a long-winded way, that would be maybe what the philosophy is.
So, not having the sort of, I don't want to call it predatory, but not locking people into an ecosystem is one thing, and just giving back to the community is another.
Right. Yeah, and very succinctly, the last 5 minutes of me rambling. Yes, that I think that would be it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. This could be a little controversial, but what is your opinion on software as a service? There are people out there who would pay $5 or $10 a month in perpetuity for something like ASBPlayer. What's your philosophy on that?
I guess I would say like whatever opinion that I do have on that would consist of like, well, it makes sense to offer a software as a service for money if you yourself as the provider of the service are having to use money to provide it, right? So it makes sense to ask people to offer to pay a price. And I think this is especially true for hosted services. So if you have like a cloud, or like there's some data that you have to store, I think JPDB stores like your flashcards and all that. So they're definitely, I think, in my opinion, within their right to ask people for money. And I think actually similarly for Migaku, they have like some kind of cloud where they store data. So I think this is totally fine. But if it's just an extension and it's something that, it's not very difficult to write, then I would just start, asking questions. Like, this is just something that just runs on your computer. It doesn't really solve a very hard problem. Maybe you shouldn't be asking for money for this. So, but yeah, I mean, I totally, like, my dream job would be to write language learning tools for people and be able to live off of it. Like, that would be amazing. But unfortunately, I think especially with immersion learning, while tools are like very central to like this type, at least the type of learning that Refold promotes, it's still a very independent experience. Like, you're doing most of the work yourself, and you really only need like a few tools that you're used to really do it well. So I think there's really a limit to like the kind of income you could actually generate from people who are into this type of language learning. So, I mean, I think it's basically, I think it is reasonable in some cases, but I would definitely never charge for people to use ASB Player. Like, even if I had that idea to begin with, I don't think it would have been possible, because somebody was just going to write, a free version of it.
So with something like ASB Player, it's a tool. And I think you touched on something very key. People get kind of caught up in the weeds. They get out in the weeds. They get caught up in the weeds with tools. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, you can use, a notepad and copy and paste sentences manually, and paste them into like a CSV or something, and make an Anki card that way. It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to have an image or a recording of a tab or whatever. But I wonder if the future of immersion learning is back to the basics, right? Where like you listen to the language, you make your Anki cards the old-fashioned way. I mean, and don't get me wrong. Again, a huge fan of the ASB Player, huge fan of the tools, but they're not necessary. And I've had people write in angry emails. I've had somebody, they wrote in an angry email, it was in Spanish, and they were like, I'm only on mobile, and you guys are promoting Language Reactor, and like, you need to have a desktop for it, a laptop, and at the end of the day, I'm like, you don't really need. I mean, it's helpful, but if you're in Latin America and you're learning English and you don't have a desktop, you can't use Language Reactor. There's nothing stopping you from getting a dictionary on your phone and just like reading web novels, or like you can make it work without the tooling.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I think I mean, the tools are cool and they're really helpful, but there is definitely like an extreme that at one end where people love their tools more than like the actual process of language learning. And I think after having like studied Japanese for like a fairly long period of time now, I've come to the conclusion that like language learning really just boils down to like practicing the fundamental skills, like first of all practicing comprehending the language, and then practicing outputting the language. So it's like just really two things, and obviously one precedes the other, so which is why Refold I think is really heavy on input. So if you can do those two things like very efficiently, then I think that will result in like good results for language learning. And obviously, well, the tools are there to help with that and make it more efficient, but they're by no means, I think, necessary for that process. So yeah, I mean, even Anki, I think that's a relatively, I think for a lot of people, well, in the Japanese language learning community, I think it's very popular because of, people like Matt versus Japan who have promoted it. But I mean, how were people studying languages before Anki, right? I think maybe they just wrote it down on like a piece of paper, or like just maybe they were just flipping through like what do you call those cards, like actual physical cards,
Actual like flashcards, like actual.
exactly.
I think they're. What are they called? I don't actually know. I've forgotten. Is there a word for them?
There used to be these like hard index cards. Is that what you call them?
Index cards.
Yeah. These tiny ones. Yeah. So I'm sure people were using those in the past before, like Anki was a thing.
So I want to say like Heisig actually, because I'm a failed Japanese learner. I want to say that like even Heisig, he back in the 70s when he was first cramming all of the kanji, he recommended like using the back of your hand and like writing the kanji, like with tracing it with your finger, like if you didn't have a piece of paper or something. So people have found a way. So we've got a coaching client who's learning Ojibwe, Anishina Bemoin, I guess, in Ojibwe, Eastern Ojibwe. And she uses ASB Player, but it's still a very manual process because there are no Ojibwe pop-up dictionaries. And Ojibwe is even stickier than Japanese. It's one of these languages where a single word is essentially a whole sentence. It's like a polysynthetic language. So there's like tons of morphemes, tons of prefixes and suffixes, and like there's just not good parsing for it. So you have to like mentally calculate what the affixes are, what the root is, type it into the dictionary. And she's making progress, right? Like, not every language is lucky to have a Yomi-chan, right? That has like a relatively good parser, good pop-up dictionary, it has Anki Connect built into it. You can just, so yeah, I definitely think I love tooling. I think it's awesome. But at the end of the day, I think that anybody can immersion learn, and you don't necessarily need the tools. You just need the input.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think this has been mentioned many times as well, kind of as like an epithet of this type of learning, is that Anki is merely a supplement, right, to the input. So I totally agree with that. And I mean, often even Yomi-chan isn't enough, and like, well, I'll just Google the thing that I'm trying to look up, right? And so it can't, even for Japanese, it can be somewhat manual, although it definitely, it's a much smoother experience because of the tools.
So with ASB Player, what do you see as its sort of like strengths and weaknesses compared to some of the competitors? So we've mentioned like Giriago, which you're not familiar with. There's Migaku, there's Language Reactor. What sets ASB Player apart?
Yeah, so I would say the first thing that comes to mind are the weaknesses. Like, as far as I know, because I haven't really used Language Reactor or Migaku to like very large extent. My understanding is that they're all-in-one tools, so people are like very incentivized to use these tools because they require less setup. And I think you mentioned that before, like ASB Player, there's a little bit of a learning curve. So that's definitely a weakness. It doesn't have its own pop-up dictionary. It doesn't have its own like lemmatizers or like tokenizers in order to like analyze the words in a sentence. So a lot of this stuff has to be manual in the case of ASB Player, at least in its current state. And it's also, like I mentioned before, it's intentionally that way because ASB Player is not going to be a better pop-up dictionary than Yomi-chan. It's not going to be a better dictionary than Vocab Sieve.
That's actually a strength, right? Because it sort of inherently makes ASB Player agnostic when it comes to languages, right? So like when setting up ASB Player for this client learning Ojibwe, I don't think that YouTube has Ojibwe as an option for subtitles. So like the subtitles, so there are Ojibwe videos with subtitles, but like they're put under random languages. Like I saw one under like Cree, which is another indigenous language, and like not having to like select a language and being able to use your own dictionary is definitely a strength. But it's also a weakness because I think a lot of people who don't use FOSS tools, they want something that's like plug and play, out of the box, like with Language Reactor. It's got a built-in pop-up dictionary. It's not great. I definitely think Yomi-chan is way better. But for like a casual person, like, if I'm imagining my dad, if he were learning Japanese, he probably would take the thing that was easiest for him.
Right. Yeah. So it really does come down to trade-offs.
It's like a double-edged sword.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's not easy to just kind of very one-dimensionally say, oh, this is good and this is bad. I guess in my case, I specifically made ASB Player as like kind of having as few dependencies as possible, and I did want people to be able to use it for any language. And I mean, part of that also comes from like just not wanting to write stuff over and over again, because it does look kind of like, part of me feels a little bit disappointed when like you see somebody writing the same kind of like MPV sentence mining tool like again, right? But I mean, I can understand the reasons for it. Like, I guess in some cases, like there needs to be some special there are technical reasons why people do this, but I just want to write something once, and that has kind of resulted in a tool that is fairly flexible. That's, like you said, that is also a strength. And I guess in terms of other strengths, I do want to say that like I haven't used Migaku specifically, but just from what I've seen of it, it has a lot of clicking and like a lot of dialogues, and which in some cases seem like maybe they could be improved a bit in terms of just like the UX flows. This is me speaking as somebody like who's like a Migaku noob. Like I don't really know what's going on, but that's my impression of what it looks like. With ASB Player, I think I did try to like make, despite the fact that it is hard for people to get used to, once you are used to it, I do think it is like about as efficient as possible in terms of the flows that most people will end up having to go through, such as like drag and drop to subtitle files in order to like load stuff, and then being able to select tracks, with like a single, as few clicks and key presses as possible. So I think it is very streamlined in that way, which I would consider to be a strength. But I couldn't say with like total confidence, oh, maybe this is better than Migaku. That is my impression, though.
And I will say another double-edged sword is just how customizable ASB Player is. It reminds me of Anki in a lot of ways. With Anki, if you know a little bit of like a little bit of code, you can make your decks do a lot of stuff. There's, I guess, I don't know, I'm not a dev. I guess there's like CSS for the styling, and it's sort of like little mini web pages, actually, I think.
Yeah.
You can do a lot of impressive stuff with Anki. And with ASB Player, you can actually like change where the subtitles are.
Oh yeah.
That's one thing that gets me is like tons of places and like tons of sites and tools do not let you move the subtitles. But with ASB Player, if I want them up here, I can have them up here. If I want them like right in the middle of the screen, I can have them in the middle of the screen. And that's one of those things, it's like a strength and a weakness. It's a strength because you can do what you want if you know what you want to do. It's a weakness because it's not very opinionated. And what I have learned working for Refold for the past 2 years, a lot of normies like opinionated software. They like software that tells you this is how you use it, this is what you do. And a lot of end users seem to like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, because then you don't have to have an opinion, right?
Right.
So, which is in some ways very easy or easier. But yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I didn't really think of it that way, but yeah, ASB Player does have like a lot of levers. I think if you open up the settings screen, it is, I think, could be pretty overwhelming. But I think because of that, I mean, that's why a lot of people use it. I was actually, so somebody, the person who suggested me at first, maybe it would be cool if you could have an option to align the subtitles to the top of the screen. I was actually very surprised that people actually do that, or like that's even something that people want to do. But it turns out there's at least one person who wanted to do that, and it was a pretty easy change to make. So yeah, that ended up going into the software. So it's like all these settings are kind of an accumulation over time of just suggestions from people, and I think the result is that it has become something that a lot of people want to use because of its customizability. But well, yeah, like you said, it can be a little bit daunting.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot I like about it. I'm, do you ever follow like Reddit?
Very occasionally, yeah, very rarely.
They used to have like an API, and there were like a whole bunch of like third-party readers. They killed those a while back, and the official app that they make you use on Android now does not have a setting for font size, which blows my mind because I actually like really, really big font. I've actually got really bad eyes. So like I blow the font up. People make fun of me for it, but hey, I like big font.
Protect your eyes, your livelihood.
Yeah, so I think that there's some benefit for like some customization for sure. And if you're like a power user, somebody who's like pretty savvy and knows what they want, it's even better. But there's like a non-zero, I don't know how many, but there's like a non-zero number of users who just, they want something plug and play that does what it does.
Right.
They don't want to think about it. And you can't appeal to everybody, right? So that's totally fine. I think ASB Player definitely has its strengths and its weaknesses.
Yeah. Like you said, can't appeal to everybody.
I also like that you can retime the subs directly in ASB Player. You don't have to like get like a subtitle retimer tool and retime them and then drag and drop. If they're off, you can actually retime like right while you're watching the show.
Yeah. That's I mean, actually some of these features have just come from, kind of the problems, very practical, solving very practical problems that naturally come up when the software tries to be as compatible with every website as possible and compatible like with every subtitle file that exists. Because naturally subtitle files aren't going to be completely in sync with video. Naturally, like if on one website the subtitles might seem to appear like in a nice, like a reasonable position, and on another website they might be a little bit off. So like a lot of these problems are just a result of what ASB Player is trying to do, which is to be like kind of a more universal tool. So yeah, I think the complexities, like in some ways, is just very natural, but it seems like a lot of people do also appreciate it. So yeah, super happy about that.
So with ASB Player, what would you say? Like, how would you describe the current state of the tool? It's definitely come a long way since I first saw it in action. As users report things, and you add, you and I guess volunteers, people who pitch in on GitHub, add new features. What would you say about the current state?
I would say, like, for a sentence mining tool, it's relatively feature complete. So like a lot of my activity on the project has been a little bit reduced, like in the past couple of months. But like if you look at the GitHub page, it has like 80 something issues on it. A lot of bugs, but also like a lot of feature suggestions. And so for me, like the next step that I would want to take with the project is to get it on the extension store, kind of remove that barrier of entry. And so like a lot more people can use it, notice it and use it. But also just make it, there are some like really big features that I want to eventually get into it, such as, I don't know if you use Chrome, yeah, I don't know if you use it regularly, but there has been a relatively new feature called like the side panel, and so like just a button on the
Talking about like
Hmm?
side panel.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
like
yes.
okay, you can see it.
Yeah, so I don't use Chrome.
Mhm.
I use, for some reason, I don't know why, I
Mhm.
use Canary.
Mm.
And it's my daily driver. And like, if I could go back 2 years ago, I would not have set everything up on Canary as my daily driver because, it's like a beta version. So like, I constantly have things just break because I'm using Canary as my daily driver. But I did notice on Canary they added the side panel view recently.
Right. Okay.
One
Like,
thing that was really annoying with me was
Mm.
they changed how Google worked. I used to like right click and then hit search Google,
Okay.
and it would force the side panel. They recently added an option to actually open the search in a new tab, and not in the side panel. Because I'm actually on a really tiny laptop,
Yeah,
I don't
it's
like the
not a
side panel.
space. Right. 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 Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess maybe they were leaning pretty hard into the side panel.
Yeah, they forced you to use it at least on Canary for a period of time before they
Okay.
added the option to like not use the side panel.
Okay. Good. Yeah, sounds like it might have angered a lot of people.
Definitely upset me, but that's my fault for using a beta testing.
Hmm.
I still don't know why I did it.
Yeah.
But yes, Canary is actually my daily driver for some reason.
Okay, cool. Yeah, yeah. For a while, yeah, it was only side panel was only on Canary. I think now they've certainly rolled it out to like the kind of the mainstream. So, I mean, I think going back to what I was saying before, yeah, that would be kind of the next thing for ASB Player, is having like just a tighter integration. Right now, it's kind of weird. I think probably people who use it for the first time are weirded out by the fact that in order to use it, it opens up another website. And this has been something that has kind of bothered me for a while. It has had some incidental benefits, but it's also just like very unexpected. Like you would just expect the extension to be standalone and kind of work on its own. So that would be like
Opens up like a GitHub or something, right? Like a tab that has the
Mhm.
subtitles in it.
Right, exactly, right. Yeah, that's where the subtitle list lives when you load subtitles into a video. And yeah, it's loaded off of GitHub, right? So it's like dependent on this website loading. And fortunately, GitHub is very stable, so it rarely ever goes down. But it's still like just very weird. And so
Yeah,
Mhm.
I hadn't thought about it, but now that you mention it, I think it is kind of weird. Yeah, and I guess you're probably leaning into like integrating the new sidebar thing as part
Yeah,
of it rather than a website is probably what you're going to say.
yeah, exactly, right, exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah, and
that's
that makes sense because like I think Migaku and Language Reader both have a like at least in the same tab they
Mhm.
add a sidebar.
Right. Yeah, I think yeah they do that right now. I believe with like a custom like UI that's kind of built into the website, right? But yeah, I just realized well the side panel is like clearly like very good for that type of thing. So that'll be the next thing, and then hopefully after that I can put it on the extension store. So uh, I guess yeah. To summarize, your original question is like what is the state of the project? It's more or less feature complete, but yeah, there's still more stuff I want to do. I want to get it on the App Store eventually. So.
And I have a pop-up dictionary for Filipino
Mhm.
that has never made its way onto the App Store.
Mhm.
Uh, it's okay, but what is sort of what does it take to get onto the I said App Store, into the extension store?
Right.
What does it take to get on there? What do you have to ensure that your app does or your extension does?
Well, there are a bunch of rules, as far as I know. Because I know because I was rejected, like when I tried to submit ASB Player some years ago. But uh, I believe like one of those rules at least is that it has to do a unique thing. It can't be like if there is another product out like on the extension store that does a similar thing. The idea is that, oh well, you should just contribute to that. So why are you uploading this whole duplicate thing, right? So that's at least one rule. And I actually am not familiar with anything else. I'm familiar with that one because I was rejected because of it. But other than that, yeah, it has to be a unique thing. And I mean, there are some technical reasons why I would want to do a little bit more work on ASB Player before putting it on the App Store. But yeah, I don't think that would necessarily be why the extension that the pop-up dictionary that you're using isn't on the apps on the extension store. So I'm actually curious why it isn't. If there's a reason why it's being prevented from being uploaded there.
Now, with ASB Player, right now it's a Chrome or Chromium extension, and
Great.
that's it. One thing that I actually got asked by Vanessa Oshiki was, why isn't it available on mobile? So mobile Chrome does not actually let you install extensions. There are some workarounds. There are some mobile Chromium browsers that do. I think Kiwi browser might let you. But would you ever want to bring it to mobile?
Yeah, I'm super interested in doing that because there just aren't many tools that work well on mobile for sentence mining, especially. I think for Japanese there's like Jidou, Jisho, but even that has its limits. Like if ASB Player could work on mobile, then that means anybody could mine streaming stuff on mobile. And it seems like I was actually very surprised to learn this, that somebody actually got it to work on Kiwi browser, which allows you to run these extensions. So it seems like actually for ASB Player, it is within reach to actually make it like more accessible to mobile users. But of course, yeah, that would take a lot of work by my estimate. Just because, you know, like right now on the PC, you have to use keyboard. It requires keyboard shortcuts to be able to sentence mine, and that's not exactly something that's gonna to work on mobile. So there are definitely like a lot of UX UI tweaks that would need to go into the software to make it do that. But to answer your question, I'm very interested in doing that. It is quite a bit of work though, so it will be a while before I actually like get to doing that.
Yeah, I think I'm all for paying for tools. You know, if you have the budget, right, where you can say, yeah, I'm gonna spend $5 a month on this tool, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
One thing that keeps me paid for tools is mobile usability. So I pay for Link because it's got everything in one little app, and I primarily immerse my tablet. And I know that I just earlier on in the podcast I said you don't have to have tools, you can do what you want. You can, but they do make your life easier to have them, and for some reason it's just not as convenient to immerse on mobile. So like there are a couple of options, you know, Link, LingoPie. LingoPie limits you to like their content. Link is fine because you can upload your own. I upload my books. But it's just not as convenient. Jidou Jisho is great. I hope the dev comes on sometime. He keeps saying he's going to come on, but he wants the app to be cleaner before he comes on and talks about it. But it's primarily for Japanese. I think it might have some minor Korean and some minor Chinese support, but it's primarily for Japanese.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, I definitely think there's a gap in the mobile tooling market, more so than on desktop.
Definitely, and I think that if for people who are looking to make money, right, on these types of tools, then definitely I think an iOS app would be like the way to do it, because I think generally people using Apple products are more willing to pay money. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Migaku is like kind of working on that. But yeah, it is kind of strange that iOS, there's like this kind of very noticeable absence of good sentence mining tools. And I would guess that the reason is technical, but somebody really needs to solve that problem and like really get in there.
What would it take to get ASB Player on iOS exactly?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately that would require Chrome extensions to be able to run on iOS.
No, I think some. I think some. What's Safari? I think some Safari extensions can run on iOS.
I see. Yeah, I don't know what Safari extensions are capable of, but assuming that they can record audio, and take screenshots, that's kind of like the two things that ASB Player does, then I wouldn't discount that possibility. I think the problem will eventually, if those two things are possible, it would just come down to execution, like a coding problem, which should be solvable. But that's a good point. That actually that idea never occurred to me. Like total blind spot as far as I was concerned. But yeah, if I could get it onto iOS, yeah, that would be actually. Maybe I'll look into it after this talk.
Yeah. So I say this because I don't actually have iOS and Android and Windows, but I have had the displeasure of setting clients who come to us up on like mobile setups, and there are a couple of tools. Like there's something called 1010 Japanese Reader, and I'm pretty sure it gives you sort of like a Yomi-chan style lookup capability, and I'm pretty sure that it's actually functionally just a Safari extension.
Okay, interesting.
But I'm not a dev. It's a little bit beyond me, but I think it's essentially just a Safari extension.
Okay.
I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I'm very blind on Safari extensions, let alone iOS tools. But that's really cool, actually. So it must mean, yeah, Safari extensions can be pretty powerful.
Yeah. Let me see here. Sorry. I think Google can answer this question.
I see it on the. Yeah.
Let's see here. Yes, they can. Developer.apple.com. It's apparently very simple, it says.
Wow. Okay. And it's on Firefox and Chrome somehow. That's pretty cool. Interesting.
Yeah, definitely get in there. And we mentioned G Show being convenient, but there's two caveats, right? Android only, so not iOS, and basically Japanese focus.
Yeah. I would. Yeah, I'm curious. Obviously I think the dev of that app of G Show would know the best, but it doesn't seem that far from working on iOS, if I remember correctly. I think that any Anki integrations tend to have problems on iOS. If I'm not mistaken, it's a little bit more complicated.
Anki Mobile versus Anki Droid. I don't think there's an API for Anki Mobile, so you have to maybe you would have to inject or something. I'm not really sure. I'm not a dev.
Right.
I don't actually know. I'm totally outside of my element. But I think that his name is Dai. I'm not sure. He's an Australian developer. I think he doesn't actually do Anki Droid. Anki Droid is done by separate people. He does Anki Mobile, which is the iOS version. And yeah, I think they're different. I don't think there's an API. I'm not sure how it would handle.
that is also my understanding, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why there's a remarkable absence of sentence mining tools on iOS. But I do think that's a solvable problem, because you could, for example, host on the internet an Enki Connect or similar integration. So anybody who's watching this can try to implement that idea. I think it is a solvable problem. So.
Worried all the devs are going to watch and they're going to be talking about how like tech illiterate I am.
Yeah.
But speaking of devs, we are almost at time. Before we go, if people want to contribute to ASB Player, fantastic free and open source sort of plugin, what's the best way to do that?
Well, there are like 80-something issues on GitHub that anybody is welcome to tackle, because that's one less thing for me to do. So you can start there. They can also just talk to me if there's a contribution or like an idea, any idea. You can please suggest. And I'm also actively looking for people to help translate ASB Player. It's already been localized in 4 different languages, so I'm always looking for more people to help with that, just to make it more accessible. And it's a language learning tool, so like it should be available in languages other than English, in my opinion. So definitely, if people have a native language that's not English, then feel free to contact me about that. But yeah, otherwise my DMs are open, and I'm always open to suggestions and contributions to the project.
That's Killer Gerbah, not Gerbah, on Discord.
Correct. Yeah. Killer Gerbah with a G. Yeah.
Yeah, I would read it as a Ger.
Great.
But it's good to know that it's Ger.
Yeah. So if sorry, maybe a digression, but the origin of that is I used to own pet gerbils, so it's kind of just a variation on that. But yeah, most people say gerbil. I don't think it's not a word, so we can pronounce it however you want.
There's a Filipino linguist I know. His name is Jerry, and he goes by Mr. Gerbah on Discord. And it's spelled very similar to how you spell Gerbah.
Right.
And I actually, when I was typing the note on my Google Calendar, I totally called you Mr. Gerbah in my notes.
Yeah, it's very similar. Yeah, interesting.
But before we go, what's your parting advice? If you had, one piece of wisdom to leave the listeners with, what would it be?
For, I think, language learning specifically, because that's been like a very large part of my life for like the last few years. So I think I can offer maybe some advice on that, which is, just keep doing it. And even if you're not motivated, I think, language learning can be one of the most like enriching things that you can do for yourself and like for your life. Even if in the moment it might not feel that way, because of the community around language learning and the people, like the whole world that you get access to by learning a language. So I would say, if you're not in a period where maybe you're not motivated, to just keep doing it and just keep going, and regardless of the method you're using, as long as you're doing more or less kind of right things, like focusing input first and then output, then you'll get eventually somewhere that where you would have been glad that you put in all the work. So I think, yeah, my advice is just keep doing what you're doing.
Right. And Killer Gerbah, ASB Player Dev, thank you for coming on. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed the talk.
I want to thank you for listening to this episode of the Refold Podcast. If you're watching the live premiere, you're in luck. Right as it ends, we have an after party over on the Refold Central Discord server. Come join us by using refold.link/join to chat about the episode. If you enjoyed the podcast and would like to hear more, you can find older episodes to listen to on YouTube and Spotify. Let us know what you thought about the video by liking and leaving a comment below. Do you have suggestions for upcoming visitors or requests for particular topics? Please feel free to reach out to me on Discord at GeorgePig #5413 or via email at clayton@refold.la. Thank you all for watching and or listening, and I'll see you next week.